The mountain air was crisp that morning, the kind that makes you feel alive, cleansed, untouchable. My house sat perched on the edge of a pine-clad slope, a place I had built piece by piece with my own hands, my sweat and my pride etched into every timber, every stone hearth. It was supposed to be my sanctuary, my escape from a world that often demanded more than it deserved. I had imagined countless weekends here, filled with quiet solitude, maybe laughter with a few close friends, never with the man who had somehow wormed his way into my family and called himself my sister's husband. Mark, the name alone made my stomach twist. My sister, bless her naive heart, thought she had married a kind, charming man. To the outside world, he was charismatic, easygoing, dependable. But I knew the truth. I had seen the way he manipulated, the subtle condescension disguised as humor, the way he thought the world owed him obedience. And now he had crossed a line I wasn't sure I could forgive. It was in a flurry of casual texts that I first realized what had happened. "Hey, thinking of hosting a poker night at your mountain house this weekend. Hope that's okay," the message read. At first I thought it was a joke. Surely he couldn't have meant it. My house, my refuge. The words hit me like a punch, and a cold fire of anger burned through my chest. My hands trembled as I typed a response, trying to keep my voice steady. "You need to ask me before using my place. This is my home." But the reply came with that infuriating ease of someone who thought rules didn't apply to him. "Relax, it's just a few friends. You'll see, it'll be fun." Fun? He called it fun, as if taking over someone's sanctuary, stripping it of its peace and warmth, was a game. As if my feelings, my hard work, my memories were irrelevant. Betrayal isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet, stabbing realization that someone you tolerated, someone your family trusted, thinks themselves above you. And Mark had done exactly that. I spent the rest of the day circling the house, touching the railings, the stone floors, each familiar surface as if grounding myself. My mind refused to stop racing. Rage and hurt warred inside me, a bitter cocktail I hadn't wanted but couldn't escape. My sister was oblivious, wrapped up in her own excitement about the weekend. She didn't see how he had maneuvered his way into my life, into my home, without permission, without a hint of respect. And then a thought began to take root, slow and deliberate. If he thought he could walk over me, he was wrong. If he thought my home, my sanctuary, was his playground, he was about to learn just how much damage a person could do when cornered. My anger transformed into focus. I would not explode in childish retaliation, no. I would be patient, meticulous. There was a satisfaction in knowing that betrayal could be met not with noise, but with precision. Mark had made a mistake he would regret. I didn't know how yet, but I would. And when that night came, when the poker chips clattered and the wine flowed, I would make sure he felt the full weight of his arrogance. For now I watched the mountains, breathed in the cold, clean air, and let the idea of revenge simmer quietly, dangerously, beautifully. The day of the poker night arrived with deceptive tranquility. The sun shone over the mountain, casting golden light across the pine trees, and the air smelled of wood smoke and frost. To an outsider, the house looked like a serene retreat, untouched and inviting, but inside, my heart thumped with a controlled fury, a tension so taut it could snap at any moment. Mark arrived first, of course, wearing that infuriatingly confident grin, the one that suggested he already owned everything he set his eyes on. He carried a bottle of bourbon as if it were a key to my home, like some token to mark his dominion. "Thanks for letting us use your place," he said, and I smiled politely, a mask hiding the storm beneath. "Of course," I replied, keeping my voice even, smooth, calm. "Make yourselves comfortable." Watching him move through my living room, rearranging chairs, opening cabinets, touching surfaces as if they were props for his entertainment, My stomach churned with a mix of rage and disbelief. Every gesture of his arrogance felt like a personal insult, but I refused to show it. Let him think he had the upper hand. Let him think I was oblivious. The guests began to trickle in, men laughing too loudly, shaking hands like they were entering a den of someone else's treasures. Mark introduced me briefly with the sort of smirk that implied I was merely the caretaker of his temporary playground. I greeted them politely, offering drinks, snacks, and subtle smiles that carried none of the warmth they expected. Inwardly, I was already planning every misplaced cup, every flicker of shadow from a curtain, every draft of cold air would work in my favor. I watched Mark set up the poker table in the living room. The green felt stretched across the surface, chips neatly stacked, cards shuffled with exaggerated skill. He wanted the performance, the applause, the illusion of control, and I would give it to him, but not without consequence. I had already prepared small, seemingly insignificant adjustments in the house that no one would notice until it was too late. The heating was turned slightly uneven, the lighting a shade too dim in key corners. A candle strategically placed near the table would leave a faint, persistent smell of smoke. A subtle distraction, nothing overt, just enough to make the night slightly uncomfortable, enough to unnerve a man who thrived on precision and dominance. As the first hands were dealt, I leaned against the wall, observing quietly. Mark's arrogance was palpable. He boasted, he joked. He made veiled comments about the house, about me, about my sister. Each word was a spark, and I let the fire grow, feeding on every syllable. My mind ticked off every tiny slight, every manipulation he had ever used, cataloging them like bullets in a rifle chamber. But the true art of revenge required patience. I could have confronted him, exploded in fury, but that would have been too simple, too satisfying for a moment, and fleeting. No, I wanted him to sweat, to underestimate me, to feel safe in his illusion of control. Then, when the moment came, I would strike in a way that left no doubt, no defense, no escape. For now I waited. I smiled politely, served drinks with an innocent air, and let the tension build. Mark's confidence filled the room like smoke, but beneath it, I sensed the first tremors of unease, tiny, almost imperceptible, but there. And I knew deep down that tonight would change everything. The calm before the storm, I thought, is the most intoxicating part of revenge. The poker night was in full swing, and Mark was basking in the illusion of control. The green felt of the table reflected the dim, warm lighting, a perfect stage for his ego. He laughed too loudly, gestured too dramatically, and leaned back in my chairs as if they were his personal throne. Each move, each boastful comment, fanned the quiet fire I had been nurturing all day. I observed him closely, outwardly polite, inwardly calculating. Every shuffle of the cards, every toast, every careless comment he made was another thread in the web I was spinning. The subtle disturbances I had planted earlier, the uneven heating, the faint scent of smoke from the candle, the cold draft near his chair worked perfectly. He shifted uncomfortably at times, rubbed his hands, frowned slightly at the cards, but he attributed it to nerves, not realizing he was dancing to my tune. It was time for the first real stroke. I walked past the table carrying a tray of drinks, letting the candle's smoke curl lazily toward him. "Careful with that, it's a bit smoky," I said lightly, feigning ignorance, my voice syrupy sweet. He waved me off, laughing, and the smoke drifted closer to his side of the table. The faint, acrid scent pricked at his senses, a subtle irritant that made him tense without knowing why. Then came the chips. I had arranged a minor accident earlier. One stack was slightly unstable, wobbly enough to topple with the slightest touch. As Mark reached for it, his elbow nudged the stack, sending chips clattering to the floor in a chaotic cascade. He froze, eyes wide, then laughed awkwardly, embarrassed, brushing off the attention, but I noticed the flush creeping up his neck. Pride wounded, ego bruised, exactly as intended, I didn't stop there. Every move I made was deliberate, every interaction carefully measured to undermine him without appearing confrontational. I offered advice that led him into small, frustrating mistakes, misreading a hand, overestimating his odds, underestimating mine. I feigned distraction, clumsiness, even weakness, luring him into the belief that he had the upper hand. Each error he made built my satisfaction like bricks in a wall. Silent, methodical, unrelenting. By the time the final round approached, the mood had shifted. Mark's arrogance had begun to crack under subtle pressure. His friends noticed, some exchanged glances, sensing the unusual tension in the room. I leaned back in my chair, watching him sweat without touching a drop of his ego directly, and then, with a simple smile, I revealed my hand. It wasn't just good, it was perfect, unbeatable, and it was a mirror reflecting every mistake, every misstep, every arrogant miscalculation he had made all evening. Mark's jaw tightened, a flush of disbelief, then anger, passed across his face. His friends leaned in, seeing his humiliation unfold in slow motion. He tried to laugh it off, tried to argue, but the cards, the chips, the night itself, all conspired against him. He realized too late that he had been outplayed, not just in poker, but in control, in dominance, in the subtle battle he didn't even know he was fighting. I smiled politely, collected my drink, and said nothing. Words were unnecessary. The satisfaction radiated quietly, deeply, like a pulse. He had underestimated me, my patience, my cunning, and now he would carry the memory of that night forever. A lesson in humility, a reminder that arrogance always has a cost. I leaned back in my chair, watching the mountain outside darken under the twilight. Sweet, perfect revenge never tasted as good as it did in that quiet, victorious moment. The house was silent the next morning. The sun filtered through the pine trees, casting soft golden light across the floorboards I had polished so meticulously. For a moment it felt almost unreal, too peaceful, too calm, like the storm of the previous night had been nothing more than a dream. But it hadn't been. Mark's humiliation still hung in the air, an invisible residue that clung to every corner of the room, and I felt the weight of it like a secret victory. I walked through the living room, noting the slight disarray from last night's chaos. The toppled chip stacks, the scattered cards, the faint traces of candle smoke lingering in the corners. To anyone else, it might have seemed like the aftermath of an ordinary gathering, but I knew better. Every misplaced chip, every subtle disturbance had been a calculated strike, a testament to the patience and control I had wielded. Mark had left early, his friends trailing behind him in awkward silence, their laughter muted, forced. I imagined the drive down the mountain, the tension in his jaw, the simmering embarrassment he couldn't quite shake. The satisfaction was profound, but it wasn't the kind that could be shouted or displayed. It was quiet, a deep internal hum of power reclaimed. He had thought himself untouchable, and I had proven otherwise, not with brute force, but with precision, observation, and the patience of someone who refused to be wronged. My sister called later that morning, her voice light and oblivious. "Did you hear about the poker night? Mark said everyone had such a great time at your place." She laughed, unaware of the undercurrents that had shifted the dynamics of the evening entirely. I smiled gently, masking the mix of triumph and melancholy that churned within me. "I'm glad everyone enjoyed themselves," I said, my tone even warm. It was memorable. She didn't ask further, and I was relieved. My secret victory was mine alone to savor. As I stepped onto the deck, breathing in the crisp mountain air, I reflected on what had happened. Revenge is often described as a fleeting satisfaction, but this felt different. It wasn't merely about making Mark pay. It was about reclaiming my space, my dignity, and my authority over my own life. For too long, I had allowed small slights to pass, letting his arrogance go unchecked. This night, carefully orchestrated, had been more than a lesson for him. It had been a reaffirmation of my own strength. And yet, the victory carried a quiet melancholy. Revenge is rarely pure joy. There is always a cost, a lingering shadow of the anger that fueled it, a whisper that reminds you of the hurt that started it all. I didn't regret what I had done, but I acknowledged the complexity of the emotions swirling inside me. Satisfaction, sorrow, pride, and a touch of lingering bitterness. The mountains stretched endlessly before me, vast and eternal, indifferent to human schemes, and in their silent grandeur, I felt a strange comfort. My house was mine again. My space, my sanctuary, had been defended without compromise. Mark had left humbled and subdued, and I had reclaimed not just my home, but a part of myself I had almost allowed him to take. I turned back toward the house, the soft hum of the wind through the pines accompanying me, the poker night, the manipulation, the humiliation. It was all behind me now. The house was quiet, my heart steady, and I understood something profound. Strength is quiet, and the sweetest revenge is not in the shouts or the spectacle, but in the calm knowledge that you have prevailed, and in that calm, I finally felt free.